So tonight we're doing Islamic eschatology, and I'm sure you now have all used that term somewhere. So like other eschatologies, Islamic eschatology is a field of study concerning events that will take place at the end of time. So it follows the Judaic-Christian tradition in that sense. It's primarily based on sources from two sources. One, the Qur'an, and two, something that is called the Sunnah, S-U-N-N-A-H. The Qur'an, of course, is the central religious text of Islam, believed by Muslims to have been revealed by Allah or God to the Prophet Muhammad through the Archangel Gabriel over a period of 23 years. It wasn't all at once, starting in 610 CE. It's organized in 114 chapters. Those chapters are called surahs, S-U-R-A-H, which consist of numerous verses. It's very poetic. The Quran is not meant to be read. It's meant to be heard. That's why you have professional readers or callers. It's very melodic. It isn't like you take it out and read it. It's very melodic. In addition to religious significance, it is widely regarded as the finest work in Arabic literature and has significantly influenced the Arabic language. So that's the Quran. The Sunnah, S-U-N-N-A-H. These are traditions and practices of Muhammad that constitute a model for Muslims to follow, what Muhammad did and said. Because remember, technically, the Quran is not Muhammad's voice. He's just the channel. It's Allah. But there's a whole tradition of things he said and did that were recorded, and these are found in what are known as the hadith, or the traditions. And they record words, actions, sometimes silent approval of Muhammad as transmitted through chains of narrators. So this became actually a science trying to figure out which narrators, because lots of these over the centuries began to come to exist, which ones could be trusted. And a whole science developed of who you could trust, who would be the better sources. For example, let's say you took this church and we were wanting to know what Elbert did and said. You would look at all the people in the church and you start to figure out those who might have a little better insight as to what he did, said, and others, so this is how this whole tradition developed. The way it works is so-and-so heard it from so-and-so, heard it from so-and-so, that Muhammad did this. And then you trace each one of those sources and see if any of them become questionable, thrown out. So that's the Sunnah. So the Islamic eschatology comes from both the Quran, but largely from the Sunnah or the traditions. So what are the components? Very similar to what we found in both Judaism and Christianity. The signs of the final age, or the end of times. The coming of the Mahdi, which I'll say more about. Judgment Day, and the destruction of the universe, paradise, and hell. So you can see very similarities. Now this depends, if you're taking it from a strictly scholarly point of view, many scholars say that because Muhammad traveled on the caravan routes and came into contact with both Jewish and Christian literature, he would have known a lot of these and perhaps incorporated them. Now, if you're a believing Muslim, it's Allah's word. So the general consensus of Muslim scholars is that there will be tremendous and distinctive signs at the end of the world. And here again, you can make comparisons with certain passages from the Gospels, and particularly the book of Revelation, right? Among which would be era of trials and tribulations, a time of immorality, followed by mighty wars and worldwide unnatural phenomena. There'll be senseless and widespread immorality. It would include the presence of tyrants, widespread use of alcohol, usury. Does everyone know what usury is? Usury is interest, and at very high rates. But in the Qur'an, as in the early Catholic Church, usury was one of the major sins. That's why capitalism tended to develop much better under Protestantism. Well, you think, what if there was no interest? So in any case, satanic music, Mick Jagger, murder, lying, cheating, and the ignorance of religion. So all these signs, these will be indications that the end is near. So we might take a look around.
The end is ready.
Yeah, Chris?
Muslims think that we're now and then.
Yeah, they seem to fit.
What happens if it didn't do it?
Yeah. So, in both Quranic and Hadith literature, a number of figures will appear at the end of times. First, there will be this figure, al-Mahidi, ad-Dajjal, translated as the deceitful Messiah. He's not mentioned in the Quran, but is found in the Hadith. So technically, if it's not in the Quran, it can always be questioned. Okay? But practically, if it's found in the Hadith, and many of these things are believed, then they tend to take on just as much weight amongst many Muslims as just Quran. He would correspond to the Antichrist, the figure of the Antichrist. He's said to emerge in the east. No specific location is given. Different sources give different locations. He's blind in one eye, you can see there, and will deceive the masses by performing miracles. He will raise an army that will kill and conquer many. There will also be the appearance of dark, satanic, evil characters, such as these guys. Remember them? Gog and Magog from Jewish eschatology. Again, this may be a fact that Muhammad was somewhat conversant with this, or again, it's if you believe it's just direct revelation. So in Islam, Gog and Magog represent wild tribes who behave like animals and are the cause of chaos. They're mentioned in the Quran briefly as doing great mischief on earth and being suppressed by this figure, Dhul-Qarnayn, who, this is interesting, see if this rings a bell, who had earlier built a wall to contain their mischief. Do you remember the Wall of Alexander? It's mentioned in Jewish eschatology. There's this wall built that later is seen as a geographical spot to keep out the barbarians. So there's a similar sort of notion there. The Quran also tells how the end of the world will be signaled by the release of Gog and Magog from behind the barrier, and then they will cause all sorts of havoc, and they will preside over a great deal of destruction until Allah comes to defeat them through the Mahdi, which I'll talk about in a moment, before the day of resurrection. So I think, can you see the similarities here between these traditions? And there must be overlap somehow. There must be some sort of overlap. Non-Quranic apocalyptic literature, so there's a lot of also just literature besides the Quran and the Hadith, which you find in the Islamic world, describe Gog and Magog as subhuman pestilence, who do much killing and pillaging until Allah commands an insect to burrow into their necks and kill them. Okay. To counter such evil, there will be the appearance of al-Mahdi, the rightly guided one. That's what al-Mahdi's title is. Who represents justice and will engage in battle with Dajjal. So there will be a battle between al-Mahdi and the evil Antichrist Dajjal. He is said to be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. So this is actually a figure that many Muslims still expect will come. There have been a number of claims to Mahdi-ship through Islamic history, just like there were many claims to Messiahship in Jewish history. But even today, most Muslims will believe, as most Christians would say, they believe in the second coming. They believe in the coming of al-Mahdi. And he will be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Yeah.
Are there actually descendants of Muhammad?
Oh yeah, they have lineages. Haji, if you ever see a Haji, before they name it, that not only have they taken the Hajj, but they are seen to be somehow descendants of the Prophet. How accurate those are, there's maybe another question. He's not referenced directly in the Qur'an, but there are numerous references in hadith. For example, one hadith was promulgated in which Muhammad prophesies the coming of a just ruler as follows. So this is from hadith, not Qur'an. There will arise a difference after the death of a caliph, and a man of the people of Medina will go forth fleeing to Mecca. Then some of the people of Mecca will come to him and will make him rise in revolt against his will. An expedition will be sent against him from Syria, but will be swallowed up in the desert between Mecca and Medina. When the people see this, the righteous men of Syria and Iraq will come to him and pledge allegiance to him. He will stay 7 years and then die, and the Muslims will pray over him. So that's supposed to be a reference to this Mahdi, who you can see from that would tend to be a historical figure. Someone who will arise and stand up for righteousness and fight evil. That's the Mahdi doctrine developed during a period of confusion and unrest in the Islamic world. This was a time when the caliphate was fluctuating back and forth. There were people arguing for one versus the other. It was a time of chaos, and this is when this idea really became prevalent. And then it was later incorporated into Islamic eschatology. Okay. So, he will win.
He will win.
Yeah. The righteous one will win.
He won't just die and go away.
No, he won't. He will be victorious. The righteous one will be victorious. And it adds that in his battle against Dajjal, the al-Mahdi will be aided by someone. Jesus. In the Quran, Jesus is referred to as Isa. Isa. In Islamic tradition, Isa bin Maryam, that's how he's always referred to in the Quran, Jesus, son of Mary, is believed to be the penultimate, that is the next to the last, prophet and messenger of Allah. Who was the last? Muhammad. So before Muhammad, there had been Jesus, who was a prophet. He is understood to have been the Messiah for the Jews, sent to guide the children of Israel, but it is not believed that he was the literal Son of God. That's the major difference. He's a prophet, not an incarnation to Muslims. So he holds the same position as Moses and Muhammad and other prophets. The Quran describes him as being miraculously born of a virgin, healing the sick, performing miracles, and rejected by the Jewish religious establishment. But not dying on the cross and not resurrected. but miraculously saved by Allah, who took him up. We'll see something similar when we talk about the Shia hidden Imam. This idea that God raises up these spirits to another spiritual level. It was problematic for Muslims as it was for Jews that a prophet would be crucified. So it said he wasn't crucified. That was only an image of his body on the cross. God had taken him up. This is the Islamic view of Isa, or Jesus. They also believe that his original message was altered over time, so that the message that Christians have about Jesus isn't the right one. Like all prophets, he's called a Muslim. All a Muslim means is one who worships God. So he's considered a Muslim. He preached that followers should adopt the straight and narrow path. And as just mentioned, in the final days, he will join Imam Mahdi and fight in this great battle against al-Dajjal. This is interesting. This is where it is said he will appear, at this famous mosque in Damascus. It's known as the Umayyad Mosque. It's esteemed by Muslims as the fourth holiest site of Islam. There's Mecca, there's Medina, there's Jerusalem, and there's Damascus. And he will come down from this minaret. It's actually known as the minaret of Jesus, or the Isa minaret that is part of that mosque. After their victory, al-Mahdi and Jesus will rule the entire world and establish peace and justice. After a reign of 40 years, al-Mahdi will die and then be buried alongside Muhammad. He will be buried alongside Muhammad. It is a reserved place in this mosque in Medina. That's Muhammad's tomb. Soon thereafter, the final judgment will take place. So, I can't go in there. No, only Muslims can go into those mosques, and non-Muslims can't even go into Mecca. Okay, and probably it's not Medina very well either, but definitely not the mosques. The countries where you can tend to go into mosques, the North African countries tend to be the more open. Morocco. What else? Where did we just go, Chris? Turkey, yep, Turkey, because Turkey is, if you know the history of Turkey, it became much more secularized after World War I. But anyway, North Africa, but even in there, in some mosques you cannot go into.
Is there significance to the greenness?
Sorry, what?
Is there significance to the green?
Yeah, green is known as the color of Islam. There's lots of conjecture as to why that is the case. One says that it was Muhammad's favorite color. Another that it represents the oasis, green in the desert. There's sort of conjecture about that. But yeah, you find green often on Islamic flags, nation flags, etc. Okay. So before recounting the events of the final judgment, I need to make a mention of a Shia variation on the final days. Remember, Islam is divided into two main groupings. There's the Sunni, who are the majority, about 80%, and then there are the Shia, a dominant minority of about 20%. In Shia thought, the equivalent of al-Mahdi is the 12th Imam, known as the hidden Imam. So, just a bit of a brief recount. Shiism differed from Sunni Islam by believing that the rightful leadership of the Muslim community after the death of Muhammad should have gone to Ali, who was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, because he was married to Muhammad's daughter Fatima. So Shia Islam wants to follow the bloodline. Legitimate leadership should go through the bloodline, which was very traditional in the Middle East and still is, the bloodline. Whereas Sunni Islam held that the companions of Muhammad, some of from different tribes, not necessarily from his bloodline, should decide who that leader would be. And that became the first caliph. So that was the major distinction early on. The Shia believed that the leadership should continue through Ali's line. Ali was the first imam. There were 12 subsequent imams. The 12th imam died as a young boy in this mosque in Samarra, Iraq, which created a problem for the bloodline, because he died at the age of 9, I think. It came to be believed that he didn't actually die, but he was raised up by Allah and would return in the future. And he would be the equivalent of the Mahdi, because when he returns, there will be a great battle between evil and good, etc., etc. What was interesting, this mosque was destroyed by Sunnis. It was blown up during the American involvement in Iraq, and that, I don't know if you remember, that led to massive violence on Sunni on Shia and Shia on Sunni. It'd be like blowing up the Vatican or something like that. So in any case, it's believed that at the end of time, you see why he's called the hidden imam? He's not among us. He's in another realm, but he will return at the end of time. And then he will defeat the Dajjal. So that's the variation. Both have apocalyptic notions of a future savior figure who will come, will stand for the good, the just, the righteousness, and will have a battle against evil. After the final battle, then, just like in Sunni Islam, because Isa will help the hidden imam as well, there will be a reign of justice. Okay, let's look now at the final judgment. Something called the trumpet blast. It's a famous surah in the Qur'an. When the angel Israfil will make a trumpet blast signaling the destruction of the earth. This is recounted in Quran Surah 69 as follows. Then, when the trumpet is sounded a single time, and the earth and the mountains are lifted up and crushed with a single crush, on that day the event will come to pass, and the heaven will crack, so on that day will be frail. And the angels will be ranged round its borders, while 8 will be carrying the throne of your Lord above that day. On that day you will be exposed. No secret of yours will be hidden. As for him who is given his book in his right hand, he will say, "Here, take my book and read. I knew I would be held accountable." So he will be in pleasant living, in a lofty garden. Its pickings are within reach. Eat, drink merrily for what you did in the days gone by. That's if your book is good. If you have a good book. But for him who is given the book in his left hand. Now here again we see this prejudice against left-handedness, which is almost universal. And was very common even here not too long ago. I think you can probably remember if kids tried to write with their left hand often, the pencil was taken out of their left hand and put in their right hand. Anthropologists have wondered about this. What's the cause? Probably the best guess is that in societies where you don't have toilets, and you have to clean yourself, you clean yourself with your left hand, you eat with your right hand. In any case. So he will say, I wish I was never given my book, if it's given to you in your left hand, and never knew what my account was, if only it was the end. My money cannot avail me. My power has vanished from me. Take him and shackle him. Pretty strong language. And we'll get to some interpretations later, but pretty strong. Then there'll be a second blast of the horn. The signal, the death of any living being still alive. The dead will then be resurrected, similarly to in Christian eschatology, and afterlife will commence with yet a third trumpet blast. So there's the first trumpet blast, you get your book, the second trumpet blast, and where you're divided up, and the third, and then we have the end of time. So in between the resurrection of the dead and the judgment, there'll be an agonizing time of waiting. So you know what your fate is. It's sort of like you're on death row, I guess. You're on death row. So each person's book of deeds, where every small and great living thing is recorded, will be read. Then all will cross the Sirat bridge. Those judged worthy for paradise continue to the heavenly abode. Those damned fall off into the fire. I think I've mentioned this before. This is probably taken from Zoroastrian eschatology, where there's a very similar notion of having to cross this very narrow bridge. There will also be what is known as a punishment of the grave for those who disbelieved between death and the resurrection. And here we see this image comes from India. It was it's about 1610, this work of art. There's three things. Do you see Israfil on the top with the trumpet? You probably can't see the trumpet, with the angel's wings up on the left-hand corner, up near the top. Okay, that's the angel. Do you see the demon below with the torch? Go down. Right. Those waiting to pass the bridge, and they're sitting there in a sort of line, they're waiting to go across the bridge, with sinners falling off. And then the souls of the believers who are above in heaven, that's the top line looking down. Beautiful piece of art that reflects very well this notion of the final judgment in Islam. The angel blowing the trumpet, the demon down below, those waiting to cross, some making it across, others not, and the heavenly just looking down. You find a similar thing in St. Thomas, by the way. Aquinas describes the heavenly looking down at those suffering in hell. Okay. So regarding what is known as paradise, okay, or heaven, we'd call it. It's Jannah in Arabic, literally garden. And that makes sense, right? You're living in the desert. A garden would be sort of an image of paradise. This is what the Qur'an says about paradise. Verily, the dwellers of the paradise that day will be busy in joyful things. They and their wives will be in pleasant shade. Yeah, if you're in a hot desert, being in pleasant shade. Reclining on thrones. They will have therein fruits of all kinds, and all that day, all that they ask for. It will be said to them, peace be on you. A word from the Lord, most merciful, from the Holy Qur'an. Now remember, you can take these literally, or you can take these as metaphors, but they're supposed to be images of what will be pleasant. Okay? Shade, fruit, reclining, peace. These are the images of paradise. Serving the believers will be immortal youth with jeweled and crystal cups filled with the purest wine, which will neither give them headache nor hangover, with fruits and meals of their desire. The book declares we have created mates. You see where I'm leading here? To some problematic issues for some people about virgins. Anyway, created mates for the believers and made them virgins, matched in age for the companions of the right hand, the good guys. And women. Notice it said their wives will be there earlier. They will be chaste. That doesn't mean they're running after you. What does chaste mean? C-H-A-S-T-E. Pure. They will be chaste. Restricting their eyes in modesty. Always looking down. Never touched by man or jinn. Jinn is like a demon. What's a jinn? Sort of a demon sort of figure. When you see them, they will look like scattered pearls. They will be fair ones with lovely, intense eyes. A reward for the good deed of the past life. The word that is used and is translated as virgin in Arabic is uri, H-O-U-R-I, which has no sexual connotation. A pure one, a virgin, like the Virgin Mary. I mean, we call the term virgin has come to automatically be associated with sexuality, right? We think virgin, but the virgin here means a pure one. These will be pure creatures, chaste, eyes down, serving. There are also references to paradise in the Hadith. For example, paradise is sparkling light, aromatic plants, a lofty place, a flowing river, a beautiful wife, and abundant clothing in an eternal abode of radiant joy in beautifully, soundly constructed high houses. In paradise are bricks of gold and silver, mortar of fragrant musk, pebbles of pearl and sapphire, and soil of saffron. Whoever enters it is filled with joy and will never feel miserable. He will live there forever and will never die. Clothes will never wear out, and their youth will never fade. So it's trying to reflect what a state of being would be like that was somehow permanent, peaceful, and joyful. Some people have wondered if anything that is permanent could ever be that. But in any case, most religions have tried to find something that is permanent. Something that doesn't change. Something that isn't in flux. Something that is eternal and lasting. It seems to be a goal of all religions to find that. And it may well reflect a human need for something like that. Because after a while, the flux, the contingency, the problematics of change can wear one down.
Well, that sounds like heaven.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's what you would call it heaven. In the Iran, it's called the garden. But there is also Jahannam, or hell. It's the place of punishment for unbelievers and evildoers in the afterlife. This notion is an integral part of Islamic theology and has occupied an important place in Muslim belief. A lot of commentary in the Hadith about it. Punishment and suffering in hell in mainstream Islam is physical, psychological, and spiritual, and varies according to the sins. The nature of the sin. Its pain and numerous torments are described in the Qur'an in parallel comparison to the delights of paradise. This is a common trope in literature, right? You compare, if you want to make a point of something, you compare it with its opposite. It's enormous in size and located below paradise. It has 7 levels, each one more severe than the one above it. But it is also said to be a huge pit over which the bridge of al-Sirat crosses.
So there could be a small sin.
Yeah, you could be in the first level. And most sins, remember, and I'll get to this, every surah of the Quran begins with, in the name of Allah, the forgiving, the compassionate, the all-forgiving. That's the balance. Okay? Allah is forgiving. And there have been, and I'll talk about this a bit, therefore interpretations about the nature of hell as being really reserved for very serious, what we would call sins or evil, if you want to call it that. It's described physically in different ways by different sources in literature. Like I said, it's located below paradise. It is said to have mountains, rivers, valleys, and oceans filled with disgusting fluids. So there you have the comparison. Okay? Disgusting fluids versus the wine, the fruit. It comes to be an ever-burning fire. Now, as in all traditions, scholars did not always agree on a certain number of questions related to paradise and hell. First, who might go to hell? And it's generally said no one can make that final decision because it's up to Allah. Okay, so you can't condemn yourself, anyone, to hell. Whether the creation of heaven and hell would wait until the judgment day, okay, or whether it already exists. These things that religious scholars discuss. Whether there was a state between heaven and hell. So is there a sort of purgatory? Because remember, all these things are interpretations from religious texts which have to be interpreted. You can take passages from the Quran, just like you can take passages from the Bible, and people will interpret them differently. And then perhaps the major question, whether those consigned to hell would be there for eternity. Common belief among many Muslims hold that hell coexists with the temporal world, just as paradise does. It's not created on Judgment Day, it's always there. And in fact, you can be there now, not physically, but spiritually. Muslim scholars disagree whether hell will last for eternity or whether God's mercy will eventually lead to its being eliminated. If God is all forgiving, the question is, what does all mean? Is God all forgiving? And if so, then everything will, in time, be forgiven. And therefore, hell is seen as sort of a way station. A way station. Similar to certain Christian views of hell, where, or at least purgatory, where your sins and misdeeds will be burned off, and eventually everyone will be saved. The argument for that in Islam is that if that was not the case, Allah's creation would be a failure. And the devil would win. If you're going to use that image. If the devil would have someone forever, then the devil wins. So there's that argument meant by more progressive scholars. Similar to a book written that I just finished reading, that a Christian Eastern Orthodox theologian, that all will be saved. In the end, all will be saved. Because without that, what are you left with? You're left with a cosmic failure. In any case, these are questions, as in every tradition, are discussed. More literalists, conservative, tend to have certain views. More progressive have more liberal views. Some say that only those who have committed the worst of sins will have to experience hell to any degree, because Allah's mercy outweighs His justice. That's how it's often said. Allah's mercy outweighs His justice. And like I said, every surah of the Qur'an begins with the phrase, in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the forgiving. There have also been a range of interpretations, from literal to the metaphoric. The term Salafi, have you heard that? The Salafis tend to be the fundamentalists in Islamic tradition. They tend to take a more literal view of these things, that we're really talking about places, not spiritual states. Heaven and hell are therefore understood to be real, and places by the Salafis. And the descriptions of the Qur'an are used to back that up. So if you want to take those are powerful images in the Qur'an. If you want to take them literally, which many of the Salafis or fundamentalists do, as I might say, I think certain fundamentalist Christians do, these are real places, and they're eternal. But then we have Sufism. Sufism refers to the mystics in Islam. These are the Muslim mystics. They're not heaven and hell are not understood as real physical places. They're seen as states of the soul, or conditions of the soul's existence, not only in life after death, but right here and now. Souls can be in hell right now, because it's not a physical place, it's a condition. And I think if you look around, you can see there are a lot of people who would say are in hellish psychological states, if you will. Their descriptions in the Qur'an are visual representations of an inner fact. In other words, the Qur'an is describing the nature of the soul when it talks about heaven and hell, not places up above and down and around below. The reason it's often Sufis say that it's written that way is because that's sometimes it's too difficult for people to understand metaphoric, internal. That it makes it pretty clear if it's stated literally what you're trying to state. So it's sort of an argument that says most people need that kind of literalism, but it's metaphoric, the Sufis would say. So they speak of the fire as the burning realization of one's absence from Allah. What we would call alienation, what we would call aloneness, what we would call deep anxiety. In our society right now, lots of studies done, one of the biggest problems that people feel alone, isolated. Okay, that's the fire. That's the fire. So according to Ibn Arabi, one of my favorite, 13th century Spanish mystic. He says, heaven and hell are subjective states, not objective realities. Subjective means within. They're subjective states of being. And you can find them right here and now. You don't have to wait till you die. Hell, now he's a Sufi who goes really far out. Hell is the realization of selfhood. What does that mean? When you're focusing on self, then you will be eventually alienated from Allah. And that's a state of hell. What is desired by the Sufis is ultimate union with Allah through love. And if you don't have that, then you will always be, to some degree, in a various state of alienation, aloneness, separateness. And all the mystic traditions say the same thing. Self is the problem. And yet we live in a culture that worships self, is continually worshiping and telling you, be all you can be. And that means be different and win. And there's nothing wrong with a bit of that, but when it becomes so dominant that you get, what do you get in your society? You get tons of people who are alone, who are alienated, because they don't answer the bell to the cultural needs. In any case, speaking of people of hell and heaven, this is what he says. When the truth is known and God reveals himself as he really is, everyone, whether in heaven or in hell, will know his position, know how near or how far he is from Allah. The nearer you are to Allah, the closer you are to paradise. Those who fully realize their essential oneness with Allah are the blessed ones who will go to paradise. Those who are veiled from the truth are the damned ones who will go to hell. But both parties will enjoy in their respective abode happiness proportionate to their degree of knowledge. So even when you're down, it's never final. There's always the road up. And for a Muslim, all that means is turn to Allah. Turn to Allah. Turn to your awareness of your connection with the ultimate unity of the cosmos. There's nothing, then you're not alone. You've got it all. That's the irony. You give it up to get it all. You give up that self, which is only worried about itself and and then you get the flow of the universal. And then finally there's Rumi, the great Persian, Turkish poet. This is what he said of heaven. At every instant and from every side resounds the call of love. We are going to the sky. Who wants to come with us? We have gone to paradise. We have been the friends of the angels. And now we will go back there. For there is our country. So it's this notion, which you find again in Jewish, Christian, Islamic tradition. At the beginning, for some reason, there's a break. There's an alienation. There's a separation. You see it in the Garden of Eden. There's a separation. In the Qur'an, it says that Adam forgot who he was, meaning he forgot his connection with Allah. And then the rest of you, look at what are the religious traditions about? Trying to get back. You're going to go through this long journey called life. But the goal is to get back from where you came from. which is an interesting trope in lots of literature. The coming home trope. It doesn't just have to be religious. You see it in the Odyssey. You see it in the notion of all sorts of novels where you go out, but the goal is to come back somehow to where you began. I think it's a very strong call in the human psyche. We have deep association with our roots. Perhaps through the DNA, I don't know. But there's generally this, and that creates sometimes this sort of nostalgia. I often have nostalgia about being 10 years old, being in my backyard in Glendale playing wiffle baseball, and that's all that mattered. That was heaven. That was paradise. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know everything else out there. It's that getting home. And when it comes to hell, though hell 100 times waylays you, in the end it pitches a tent for you in heaven. It is God's loving kindness in order to lead you to his kingdom of safety. So it's sort of a warning. These passages in the Bible and in the Qur'an, they're warnings. Because you can experience hell, depending on your choices. Not only of your individual, but of your group. And what you do does count. These are warnings. And sometimes it said, to warn a child, you've got to speak pretty strongly. If you're trying to warn a child not to go near that fire, you don't say, Bobby, let's talk about this. You say, stay there. In any case, that's how the Sufis tend to see it. It's an internal state. It can be seen in one way as an advantage when you realize what it's calling you to get away from. It's sort of like if you in the 12-step programs, right? When the addict finally realizes what the addiction is, and that realization connected with the idea of a higher power can then lead you out of that addiction. Trying to do it by yourself, I guess it can be done, but it's not that easy. Okay, that finishes up with Islamic eschatology. Next week we're going to look at Hindu and Buddhist, which is a little different because it's cyclical rather than linear, but you'll see some similar themes because all human beings have to deal with the same problems. The same problems. Yeah, Chris.
The quote from the movie is very much like the Bible where it says, "Be still and know that I am God."
Yeah.
And it says, "The inspiration you seek is already within you. Be silent and listen."
It's there.
Mm.
There.
Mm.
And what gets in the way? You.
I'm curious about some of these paintings or whatever. When were they done? Because I thought the Muslims did not believe in showing.
Generally speaking, although there are exceptions, especially in Iran and India. Okay, you'll find Mughal art. What you won't find are pictures of the Prophet.
Oh, no.
No. Yeah, and even in Iran, you have the tradition of the Persian miniature. Those were usually, and paintings weren't put up on walls. They were collector's items often. They didn't use paintings like we do to decorate. So a lot of the miniatures were kept in albums. So you weren't displaying it overtly. But there are exceptions. In Iran, you tend to get a little more visual art because strong Arabic Islamic understanding was softened to a great degree in Iran because it had a large Zoroastrian tradition behind it. And in India, there's everything. So yeah, but that's a good question. Generally speaking, you're not supposed to represent figures, but you do find them. Even did you see when I showed the hidden imam? Do you notice his face was veiled? Yeah. Or if you ever see, there are a couple images sometimes of Muhammad on his night journey, but you won't see his face.
And not in mosques.
Oh, and no, there will be no figures of any type in mosques. There'll just be geometric art, calligraphy, beautiful calligraphy, but not images.
Does the calligraphy say anything?
Generally, the calligraphy are going to be passages from the Qur'an. Yeah. Or sometimes, yeah, I'd say by and large Qur'an.
So if you could read it,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing, if you can read it, because it becomes an art form, and unless you know how those letters are curling, then you imagine if you had your an A that could be written part here and up here and over there. You got and there's schools of calligraphy. They're art forms. Okay, so like I said, next week we'll finish up with the eschatology. Then I'll do 2 weeks on Chinese religion, starting with Confucianism, and then Taoism, and then I'll probably take a week off because of my retina surgery, and then we'll look at Buddhism, and then the final one, Christianity in China. A lot of people don't realize there was a fair number of Christians in China. Well, there are a fair number of everything in China, if you have that size of population. Okay, thanks for coming.